Good morning. Welcome to our Voices from the Frontlines webinar. We're excited to have you as a part of this ongoing series. A little context about me and Significant Matters, the organization that I represent. It'll help you to understand what we're trying to get at in these webinars. I pastored for about 32 years, and 15 years ago, I started this organization called Significant Matters. In large part, it was in response to the kinds of things that we were doing to try to help through missions and the impact we were or weren't having, and some of the unintended consequences that were happening through the things that we were trying to do in and amongst the poor. And so it's been a huge learning curve over these last 15 or 20 years. And over that time, we began looking for ministries on the front lines that were trying to champion new ways of working with the poor, that were committed to the local church and its position and its responsibility to the poor and the marginalized around the world. And could we begin to find some folks that were pushing the envelope on that model and maybe paying a little bit of the dumb tax for the rest of us? And then out of that, we started to do a TED Talk type of an event where we would bring these pioneers together and have them give us their best 18-minute story about what they're doing, how they're doing, and why they're doing it. And so we call those SAT Talks, stands for Sustainability and Transformation. Because we want to say to the church, look, if you've read books like Toxic Charity or When Helping Hurts, oftentimes we get discouraged by what we see and maybe thinking that we're part of the problem. And that's not where we need to be. It's not about a guilt complex about where we need to move from. It's just that we need to move from that. And having the stories of people out there that are doing it will help us in some tremendous ways. So you can find all of those SAT Talks on our website. You can find them on our YouTube channel, but everything from soup kitchens to business as mission around the world, things that the church is doing to try to help the poor become the protagonists in their own stories and how they can lift themselves out of poverty. And so we wanted to do a series of webinars called Voices from the Frontlines. And I was excited when I got a hold of a couple of our SAT Talk presenters, Mike Sicosio out of Schenectady and James Whitford out of Joplin, Missouri, and the work that they're doing among the homeless and how they have taken their models to a whole different level. And as an organization, our goal is to work with churches to help move their mission more towards sustainable solutions and connect with business-minded people who can help that happen. So I'm just delighted to have Mike Sicosio with Schenectady City Mission and James Whitford with Watered Gardens in Joplin, Missouri, and True Charity Initiative. And I've asked both of them also to bring an individual that has benefited from the ministry to be a part of this webinar as well. So I'm excited to have that kind of lived experience. So Jocelyn Brisson with us out of Joplin, Missouri. Hello, Jocelyn. So there you go. And then we've got Anthony Mayers with City Mission Schenectady. Anthony, we're glad that you can be a part of this as well. So let me jump right into this. I want to start out with a simple question to both Mike and James. Mike, James, why don't you just kind of get us started? Tell us, what is it your organization does that you're so passionate about, and how did you get this way? Hey, James, hold on a second. James, I think you're on mute. My bad. Let's see something here. All right, James, you have to unmute yours.
And there you go. Did I take care of it?
You did. Mike, you're going to have to do the same thing. Sorry about that.
All right. So anyway, I was just saying that, yeah, it's been a lot of years. 20 years ago, we started the ministry. My wife and I did. And of course, the compassion and the passion, it has always been there. But took a lot of learning curves through the early years, figuring out that we can have a lot of good intentions that don't necessarily yield good results. And so I think over the time frame that we've been doing ministry in Joplin, we've really come to a point of saying, okay, it feels good to give, and there's a lot of compassion at work, but I think I'm just as passionate now, right, about how to measure those results and make sure that the energy that the church and partners in Joplin are putting toward helping people are really helping people. And so for us, the ministry is very multi-tentacled. There's a lot going on in the way of long-term program work and emergency shelter work and a lot of other things that we don't have time to get into today. But I think in answering your question, Tom, about what are we passionate about, it's about really making sure that time, energy, resource, compassion, and intent are bearing good fruit and bringing about real change in people's lives.
Thanks. Mike, how about you?
I think passion is a great word, and we share a lot of parallels with James and his work at Water Gardens, but really two things. First of all, we are passionate about providing emergency shelter. When people are in desperate conditions, when it's below zero up here in the Northeast, it matters to have a place where you can go and they will take you in, and it is warm and people care about you. Or if a woman's in a domestic violence situation, that her and her children can go to a place that is safe where they're going to be nurtured and loved. So those most basic things of feeding people or sheltering them or clothing them, and certainly from a faith-based perspective, Jesus said, these are the things that will kind of define you. So we're passionate about the work that we've always done. But our second passion is watching lives change. Because what really fuels the mission is not only taking people in as an act of charity or benevolence, but it's always with the belief that they have greatness in them, that God created them for a purpose, that they have a potential. So as soon as we can bring some stability, the job is to see how has God gifted them, and how do we tap and get them to see it for themselves, give them training programs so they can be equipped. And the joy of that, the joy is to watch people grow, watch people become leaders, not simply settle for survival, but begin to thrive and flourish and serve others. Invariably, a work like a mission, you have more defeats than you have wins. There's more heartbreaks perhaps than there are celebrations. But when you get a victory, when you get a celebration, it is life-changing, and then it's exponential, because that person, that man, that woman, they go and touch others. And so the work grows and the impact grows. I was with a news station yesterday, and he asked me the question, how do you stay excited after 31 years at City Mission? I said, well, you know what? Everybody you've met today, every staff person, they used to be a resident here. So for all the difficulties, every day I have evidence, concrete proof that God is in the life-changing business, and by his grace at City Mission, we get to be a part of it.
So, and with both of you, what has always impressed me about the work that you do, and Mike, you started off by saying it, is that we're excited to provide emergency relief. And James, I know you're excited to provide emergency relief as well. But what you folks have done, which I think the average volunteering church in the suburbs doesn't understand, is that you have created a continuum that begins with relief, but you have made development an intentional, you've made betterment an intentional part. So if you think of this as a process that people have to go through, there's relief, there's betterment, and there's development. There's relief that deals with the emergency at hand. There's the betterment that creates a capacity in an individual. But development is bringing resources, economic resources, the kinds of things that will allow them to take charge of their own life and the dignity that comes with that. And what I've seen in both of your ministries has just been really impressive to me, how you've connected those three things in very intentional ways. Because my experience is that if you're not intentional in connecting all three of those things, you will end up in a helping that hurts kind of a thing. Mike, talk to me a little bit about your model, and what is it that you're doing that pushes the traditional model of church missions, and why does it push on that?
That's a great question. Look, the churches have always led the way in benevolence, always understood that you can't say we're following Jesus if we're not caring about people who are at risk, people who are in need. So we've never had to spark the church to be generous or to care. But perhaps where we're pushing things is to say, but these people that you're caring about, that you're being generous to, they are meant to surpass you. That although you have a set of gifts that allow you to excel, these folks, they're not meant to forever be at one strata of a vertical hierarchy. In fact, in the kingdom of God, there are no vertical hierarchies. It's all horizontal. So as you're working with people, again, get ready that they may be called to become better than you are, to be the ones who start making the decisions. Don't make the mistake of keeping them in the box that they were in when you first met them. Now that's challenge, even here at the mission. I was comfortable with saying, okay, you're one of our graduates, and we have Anthony here with me you're going to hear from. Say, okay, Anthony, you've graduated, we'll give you a job. You know what we all learned? Oh my gosh, Anthony's a better leader than I am. In many situations, his instincts, his life experience, his anointing from God, he's better. People look to him more. So I had to be okay with that and say, Anthony, surpass me. Be better than I am. Take this mission to a higher place. Same thing for the churches, whether it's the pastor or the missions board or the elders. Get ready to be surpassed and be excited when it happens. The church has something essential to offer. We can't do our work without the church. But guess what? And here it is. The folks we're serving, they have something that you need that is essential. Get excited about that.
Good. James, by the way, for both of you out there, if there's things you want to add to something that somebody else has just said, feel free to do that. Also, addressing the participants, I'm sorry, I meant to say this early on. We will definitely take time at the end for questions and answers. So we would ask you to start putting some questions in there, and guaranteed that we will take 20 minutes at the end and answer as many of the questions as we can get to. So go ahead and start filling up the Q&A slot on your webinar there. We'll go from there. James, I mean, kind of a little go this way with me. What is it that you would say the average church volunteer needs to better understand about poverty in general if they want to really be of help in the work that you're doing?
Well, I think they've really got to think about quality instead of quantity. So I think that's the big gap that I see, or people are thinking about. There's so many folks that need help, or there's so many folks that need to be fed, and so it's easy for people to get involved in the idea of quantity instead of quality. But we need to be able to slow the train down, where it's not just about how many people we can feed or shelter, that type of thing, but what's the quality of the individual relationship that can be formed between somebody in the church and somebody who's lost or struggling or addicted or in need. And that's going to be the thing that I think the average person is going to have to really grapple with. Not long ago, I was in the top floor of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, where we listened to Ben Carson, and Ben Carson was talking about if every church would just adopt one homeless person, if every church in America would adopt one homeless person, you talk about thinking quality and not quantity. He said, you could eradicate homelessness in our nation today. So he's thinking about relationship, he's thinking about one-on-one, and that's really what we've got to be thinking more about. It's that bridging social capital idea, Tom. It's the idea that there are folks who need to develop new relationships outside of the ones that they have, so that they can find new opportunities, and that's important for any average volunteer coming into our mission to know.
And and I find that that's the difficult thing, and one of the challenges one of the major challenges that we have to work with suburban churches on is that very idea right there. And it comes down to the depth at which you need to go, the kind of relationship that it takes. And it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's not a drive-by sort of thing. We call it redemptive entanglement. At some point, you have to be willing to become redemptively entangled in the messiness. We're all redemptively entangled in our own children's lives. I mean, they can do all kinds of craziness, and we cannot not show up. But it seems like in our volunteerism, when it comes to these intractable problems, we just think we can do it with a one and done sort of thing. Again, one of the reasons that I wanted to highlight the work that you folks do through SAT Talks and these kind of webinars is that you have done a wonderful job at creating the kind of on-ramps that the average volunteer could come into the work that you're doing and over time see the importance. But the way you folks are lined up, it's almost impossible for suburban volunteers to do much harm because you've got safeguards in there for the way in which volunteers can work, and I really appreciate that. Well, I want to listen, hear from the folks that you've brought with you. Both of you have brought somebody with you that we want to ask them a few questions as well. So I'm going to let you folks, I'm going to let you folks introduce us to the folks that you brought with you. So, so first of all, James, would you introduce us to Jocelyn? Tell us a little about her story, and then Mike, introduce us to Anthony, and then I'm going to ask you both a question. Introduce us, James.
Sure. Well, glad to do that. So I have sitting beside me Jocelyn, who, God just has done an incredible work in her life. And we've known each other for many years now. But when it started out, it was a lady on the streets who was in a lot of trouble with the law, and she got assigned, was it 400 community service hours to do at our mission. And you're not going to spend 400 hours of work in our mission and not meet Jesus. Yeah. And she met Jesus, came to faith, and then her whole life, of course, Jesus is the transformer of lives. And so he transformed her life, and she went back to school, to college, and said from the very beginning, I want to go to college and I want to come back and work at the mission. And she now manages our emergency shelter at Watered Garden. So it's just a great honor to be sitting beside her.
So I'm going to jump right in. We've got you on the screen, Jocelyn. I'm coming to you, Anthony. We're going to get there. But Jocelyn, tell me a little bit. Tell me about your experience with Watered Garden. What is it about Watered Gardens that's different than some of the other places you've been? I understand you've been in homeless shelters in LA and various other places. There's something different about Watered Gardens. What's the difference between what you experienced there and other places?
There's a lot of things. I mean, it was a lot of, relational. People took the time to sit down and talk to me and get to know who I was and what was going on in my life, and listened. And that was a big part. But also it was a big deal to not just take, because I've been in a lot of missions where they would give and I would find myself just taking advantage, and was just going in that cycle. Water Gardens helped me develop some encouragement on my self-worth, and I didn't think I could live life without welfare. I was raised on it, and so I couldn't hold a job because I was an addict and all this stuff. And so I got a lot of encouragement, and I think the best thing it's ever done for me is shown me that I am capable of being self-supporting and being independent. I don't need all that extra stuff. I've been taking care of myself for a few years now, and it feels really good.
Gosh, and I've never met anybody that didn't want that to be their story. No matter how desperate they were, no matter how difficult the situations are, I think deep down inside, all of us, I mean, even the most desperate person would love to be in charge of their own story. Great. Introduce us to Anthony. And I'm sorry, did you introduce us? I've already lost track.
No, I have not introduced Anthony.
Okay, introduce us to Anthony, and then I want to ask you the same question. Anthony, go ahead.
Okay, well, my privilege. Anthony Mayers is one of our top staff members here at City Mission. He came here as a resident, graduated our Bridges to Freedom program. We hired him, but he's exceeded all our expectations. We did see in Anthony, this man is a leader. Now, perhaps in his life, he was leading in the wrong direction, but he was created by God to lead. Now he is leading for the right purposes. And I'll just say this about Anthony. Whenever we have graduations, I don't think we've ever had a man graduate that doesn't talk about Anthony, how Anthony met him in the driveway, how Anthony came alongside him when he was ready to give up, how Anthony walked with him, how Anthony got him clothes, how Anthony served him. And then the power of Anthony's testimony, that Anthony doesn't hide where he's been. He uses it so that God can use him. Folks at the mission have a wonderful expression, God's made my mess my message. Anthony Mayers is a man with a great message and a great heart to make it real.
Super. Anthony, thanks for being a part of this. So same question to you that I just asked Jocelyn. What is it about City Mission? What is it that you found there that maybe you didn't find in other places?
What I found at City Mission is a God-given program and people that cared about me. Other programs, people didn't care. They want. Here, they came alongside of me and helped me to come closer to God and to get me out of my brokenness where I was broke at. And they helped me to get back on my feet and get an education and be a leader. And that's where I became. And I didn't know it, that the mission trusted me until I seen down the line, wow, someone do care about me and love me, and I'm able to take that leadership and lead other guys and other women to move forward.
That's exciting. Now we're here talking, hopefully we're talking to suburban churches that work with ministries like that, and we're trying to say some things. Look, we need your help more. We need you to kind of step up in different ways or in additional ways and that kind of stuff. But I understand in talking with Mike that your church has done a great job at partnering both with you and with City Mission. What is it about your church?
Where they open arms, like that's the right word for it, open arms. They open, like they welcome you with open arms. I become a leader there, and I bring guys to church. We set up chairs. We set up chairs for shows. We do grass around it. We cut the grass around the church, and we usher, like that's what you lead. You lead by example. You can't just help in the community. You gotta help outside the community and help someone else.
One thing, Tom, because that church, they recognize the giftedness of our folks, and they brought them onto leadership pathways where they're representing the church. The pastor also said, I need to come down and do a Bible study at the mission. They can't just come to me. But he's a smart man. He said, Anthony, you make it happen, because he knows Anthony's got all the capital here. Anthony's got all the credibility. So the pastor recognized that Anthony was more gifted than he was in terms of putting men into a room to listen to an outside pastor come in and talk about the Bible.
And he bring other leaders that's part of the church. They come here and they sit in and I bring the men that's at the mission. We bring them to church and we come to church together right here. Bible study right here.
Exciting. So there is that whole idea of reciprocity,
Yes.
and the dignity that happens when there is this sense in which we both have something to receive from one another. Yeah. I want to go back to you, Jocelyn, and kind of pick up on something that James was talking about just a minute ago about churches and volunteerism. Question for you: What do you wish the average volunteer from the average church understood about you and others at Water Gardens that are trying to work through their stuff?
That nobody is any better than anybody else. We're all children of God, and that it's okay to take a moment to give a kind word or to get to know somebody.
So I want to push on that a little bit. So are there things that well-meaning volunteers say and do that give the impression that they don't respect you, that they don't respect folks? I want to push in a little bit on that, because I'm not sure that a lot of volunteers understand some of the subtle signals that are given or things that are said. Do you feel comfortable kind of moving into that or talking a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, most of our volunteers are really, really good. We kind of vet them pretty good about what's going on. So
Good.
I don't know a lot of that.
Tom, we do a lot of education, and so we're really helping our volunteers understand that poverty is incredibly complex, that each individual often has, fractures that have occurred early on in life, and that one of our, core values really is it's human dignity, right? That every person is a noble creation, and every one of our volunteers goes through some training to understand our core values, and that's one of them that we hold very highly. So, but now, and I will say that there are, I think, maybe more subtle, one of the struggles that we've had are volunteers maybe not wanting to step into a place of holding a client or a resident maybe more accountable when really they should. And so that's that big heart, right, that brings the volunteer in, and they understand that maybe the worth of the individual, but when it comes time to say, hey, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or let me correct you a little bit, or can I show you a better way to take care of this task? Sometimes that's where we find a little bit of a roadblock. And I think that, in some ways it's a little more subtle, but we're probably not respecting the inherent worth and value of the person made in the image of God if we're not willing to step into that space and say, hey, it's that tough love kind of idea. But really, I think that's where we're seeing a little bit of failure right now that we're going to have to work harder on with our volunteers.
So this wasn't in my list of questions, but I want to ask this real quick of both Jocelyn and Anthony. So that particular issue right there, how did Jocelyn, how did Watered Gardens hold you accountable early on in your journey that you didn't like? And I'm going to come to you, Anthony, and ask you the same question. When did Watered Gardens, when did City Mission hold you accountable to something that was difficult early on in the process? Jocelyn.
Well, they're pretty straightforward with me. At that particular time, Katie's wife Marcia was working in the shelter a lot, and she's very direct, and and just would ask me questions, and I would try to maybe schmooze through it, and she'd always call me on it, and gave me another direction, via scripture or via just unconditional love, and that just kind of helped me out a lot.
Do you resent the accountability?
At the time, yeah, it was like, oh God, here we go. But in the end, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if that didn't happen.
Awesome. Anthony, same line of questioning.
Go ahead.
So where did you get held accountable in your own journey that was hard for you?
Being in the mission at 10 o'clock, being here, and being responsible. And I can say this as a person that was using and being in the streets too long, and you had no curfew, you had no guidance, you had no direction, but coming in here under the mission rules and this day rules, that being in here at 10 o'clock, and being accountable, and going to school, going to programs, and asking for help for education. That's it.
Tom, I'll jump in. Anthony has a great expression. He says to the guys, you got to leave your pride at the door.
Yeah.
Right? Anthony will tell the guys there's a treasure for you in there, but you got to leave your pride outside or you'll never get it. So I think what Anthony's saying is it's hard for a grown man who's been on his own to suddenly be under a lot of rules and a lot of responsibilities. So just as Jocelyn said, it's not necessarily appreciated in the moment, but the results are good. And I would add one thing, Tom, talking about helping churches understand. We were blessed here at City Mission with Bridges Out of Poverty, the curriculum that really gets into understanding what is cultural poverty, what is generational poverty. And I use my own, I had worked at City Mission for 19 years and did not understand it. Now think about that. My life's work is homeless shelter. I knew all the whats of generational poverty. I didn't understand the whys. Why are people doing this? Bridges Out of Poverty was my personal epiphany, my breakthrough experience that changed my paradigm. And once you get understandings, you stop coming to wrong conclusions that are based on assumptions. So Bridges Out of Poverty is out there. I really encourage people to get it, to study it, to learn from it. It made a huge difference at City Mission, now across our whole community.
And we'll be sending a link out to that as a part of the follow-up on this. And that's a really critical point for any church that wants to be more a part of the solution. You've got to reframe your understanding of poverty and the volunteer experience. And Bridge is a great resource to do that. Hey, let me ask you both.
It was a great resource for me, getting out of poverty, because I always found myself going backwards. The only way I'm gonna get out of poverty, I gotta utilize the resources to get out of poverty. And you know, today I utilize the resources around the mission and in the community to stay out of poverty. Now I'm in sustainability.
That's awesome. Hey, for both of you, let me go to you, Jocelyn. What's been one of your greatest accomplishments that Water Gardens has helped you with?
Being self-sufficient. You know, learning that my story, you know, it's not from shame, because God has taken everything, has turned it all towards good. Now my mission is to give the residents and the people that come into the shelter, the outreach center, for whatever services, that there is hope and there's a better way to live.
That's super. Anthony, what's one of your greatest accomplishments that City Mission has been a part of?
Becoming a great leader. I got married. I was in debt, $10,000 in debt. I'm out of debt. I got out of debt in 3.5 years. So I'm so grateful to be a part of something bigger than me.
That's awesome. So I want to go back to James and Mike for just a couple minutes before we jump into some Q&A. So for both of you, James, what is one of your biggest concerns for the homeless population in the wake of COVID-19?
Well, in the wake of COVID-19, I don't want to be a pessimist here, but I feel like to some extent, our country has it's like the Titanic grazing against the iceberg, and nobody really knows how damaged things are. But I feel like we're going to come into some times that are really tough. That we're going to have to be thinking about how to do a great job of helping a lot of people. And so I think my biggest concern is that when that increase of need arises and we're kind of in crisis and relief mode, that all we do is just say, we've just got to dump relief. We've got to dump relief and dump more relief, because there's so many people who are hurting and in need. And I think, you know, that anytime somebody's hurting and in need, it's a serious thing. You have a lot of people who are hurting and in need, it's even a more serious thing. But what we have to be careful not to do is to not take the time to understand what's going on in each person's life, even when a person's life may be affected by a pandemic or whatever else might, an economic collapse. We still need to understand people on an individual level. And I think that's really important. There was a recent movie, Tom, The Last Full Measure. And in it, there's crisis. It's one of the hottest firefights in the Vietnam War. And there's an airman, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but this airman is a medic, and he's dropped into the middle of this hot firefight, and he is tending to each person in this crisis, right? In this this hot zone, and he's tending to each person, finding out what's the wound, where is it, how do I need to treat it, and he's moving on to the next. And I feel like that's a great example of what we need to be thinking about when it comes to relief, rather than what good would it have done if that helicopter that dropped him into that zone would have simply just dropped out cases of gauze or a bunch of bottles of alcohol, you need somebody who's going to be taking the time to know what's going on with the individual. And so I feel like there's a big risk coming up that we are going to forget that and create even more dependency rather than empowering people and respecting their inherent human dignity.
And I would say that I kind of share that concern. I know that Barna put out a report where they polled American pastors, and I think there were 6 or 8 concerns. The number one concern had to do with how do we reach our people online during COVID, and all the way down to we're giving time and energy to mobilizing people and resources to people in need in our community, and only 2% of the American church was even thinking that way. I mean, so there's obviously a lot going on in the American church right now that's going to redefine what it means to be church and so forth. But it says something. It should signal some kind of a warning of where the church might find itself if it's not intentional to do otherwise, like you just said.
Yeah, we need to be intentional and careful always. And the more indiscriminate giving that's done, even in a time of need for relief, the higher the likelihood that we actually foster isolation among people rather than healthy relationships.
Yeah, and I've just been struck by that in all of this, that to find ministries like yours that have done a lot of the heavy lifting ahead of time. So I'm going to guess that in some ways you're not ministering any different during COVID than you were before. Mike, is that a true statement? Are you doing things fundamentally different in the midst of COVID?
The principles have changed. I'll give you a up and a downside. The downside is all our meals for the community are takeout now. And because we can't come to the dining center, we can't sit around the table, we can't break bread together. That's a huge loss for us. We always tell people, you can't get out of poverty in isolation. You've got to connect. James talked about social capital. You got to build relationships. When folks graduate, the final 2 words, stay connected. COVID talks about isolation. And if our folks move into isolation, there's almost no way out. There's no way towards sustainability. On the positive side, overnight, we lost all our volunteers. That's 700 hours a week of volunteers at City Mission gone overnight. Guess what? The residents had to step up and fill the gap. And they did. And they learned something about themselves. We had a recent graduation. I said to the graduates, you kept the faith in a pandemic. You never have to ask what's inside yourself again. You never have to wonder, The only question now is, will you live it? So a lot of our folks discovered purpose. As a matter of fact, we just hired 5 residents to come on staff at the mission because they were so outstanding in that pandemic. We say crisis reveals. In their case, it revealed something in them that had hitherto not come forth. So like anything, Tom, big events bring opportunities and they bring challenges. They bring upsides and downsides. Our job is to minimize the downside and do all we can with the upside.
That's fantastic. Hey, before we jump into some Q&A time, I want to go back to the whole church question one more time and ask both of you, James and Mike, what are some churches that have done it right? Can you give us an example of some church or some churches that you feel really have gotten it right, and in so doing have become a real good and helpful partner in what you're trying to do? James, you have something in mind?
Well, I do. It's kind of Unfortunately, I think a rare example, but we have a local church, Journey Church is their name. And it's interesting that the great work that they're doing, that I would say is partnering with the ministry, is not in direct partnership with the ministry. It's actually what they're doing on their own in their own neighborhood that I feel like is a great partnership to what we would want to see. They have a program called 2 and 5, and they have a very clear objective of impacting every home within a 2-mile radius of the church in the next 5 years. So it's not a quick fix kind of a thing. They're doing house to house. They're building relationships. They're helping people who are struggling in poverty, and they're actually measuring their outcomes. They're looking at how well are they doing with actually helping people find employment, develop budgets, different things like that, further their education. So Journey Church, in my mind, is a great example of a church that's doing some great work in our community and indirectly partnering with us because we're promoting the same type of work.
Excellent. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anthony's Church, Open Arms, great example. There's another church, quintessential suburban church called Grace Chapel. And about 10 years ago, they scholarshiped some of our men to come out on their men's retreat up at Camp of the Woods, beautiful place in the Adirondack Mountains.
Yes.
And I think it did begin as a benevolent act, but they noticed something. When they got into the small groups, let's be honest, as suburban men, we're really careful about what we share. We will share, but it's kind of surface stuff, acceptable stuff. When our guys get in groups, they bring it all. They bring out with the real issues that are causing them problems. And you could see the men of this suburban church, these professional men, kind of say, wow, so that's what a breakout group is supposed to be like. And so it went from simply a benevolent act to realizing there was a synergy, that the men of grace could do something for our folks, but our men added a lot. They made a difference in that retreat and made it more real, more transparent, and I would argue as a result, more fruitful.
Awesome. Good examples there. Love that. So maybe just either of you or both of you. So what are you most excited about, even in this time of pandemic and heightened tensions in our communities and nations? Any thoughts? Mike, James?
Yeah, we're all going through not only the COVID challenges, but certainly the issues of justice, the racial tensions. And I think we have an opportunity as the body of Christ to build a model. I mean, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to create diverse gatherings because this is how God made us. He brought diversity into his creation. We should have engagements, bodies of mutual respect and celebrating giftedness, holding things in common, but also being okay with what we disagree with and realizing that's part of diversity. That's part of the beauty as well. I was asked by one of our residents recently for a local incident involving law enforcement. He says, what do you think about that? Do you think that's right? I said, well, look, we need to be serious about issues of justice. But as a Christian organization, we have a higher standard than any law will ever have. Man, woman, and child we have to see as Christ himself. That's how we need to operate. I believe if we will not give into fear, if we will not give into polarization, if we will not reduce complex things to simply political things, we have an opportunity to build something and demonstrate what God intended and what God has called us to do. Let's go out and build models. Tom, you've heard me say before, small reality is more compelling than a grand theory. Let's build small realities that other people can look at and say, oh, that's what it means to have unity in the midst of diversity.
I have heard you say that, Mike, and I love it every time I hear you say it.
Thanks.
Keep saying it. Keep saying it. James.
Oh, yeah, Tom, I think just echoing a little bit of what Mike's saying, I heard him say opportunity 3 or 4 times in that couple of minutes, and I agree. I think that there's a lot of opportunity right now. I think that our nation and beyond our nation, we have people all over the world that are for the first time realizing in a new way that a lot of the things upon which they've been leaning are not as stable as they thought that they were. And so I think people are going to begin to search. Some are searching already. What is stable? And of course, we know the who. And so I think there's a great opportunity for the church to engage our culture right now with Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that he's unfailing in every way, and that we can find true contentment and peace and joy in the middle of any circumstances. And that's what our nation needs today. And so very excited about the opportunity.
That's right.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks. So we want to spend 15 or 20 minutes in some Q&A. And for our attenders out there, please, for any one of our panelists here, for James or Mike or Jocelyn or Anthony, if you've got any kind of question, I'm going to jump to one of the first in our list right here. The question, Mike and James, I think this is more aimed at you. What do you think is the biggest barrier to more successes in your work? What can the church do to help work through these issues? So again, what do you think is the biggest barrier to more successes in your work, and what can the church do to help work through these issues?
So I can start, and I'll just say that I would think that it would be very helpful if the church at large would embrace this two-word sentence: challenge develops. So that two-word sentence is incredibly important. Challenge develops. And if we really want to make a difference, we're going to have to remember that. I'm thinking about Jocelyn and Anthony right here have talked about challenge that have been applied in their lives. And as a result, they've moved beyond, out of relief, beyond rehabilitation to development. And we just need to know that challenge develops. And Tom, you know my background in physical therapy, but that was something that you just know as a physical therapist. If you're going to really be able to help somebody from where they are, you're going to challenge them in some ways that are going to increase their strength and their mobility. And if you don't, then they're not going to get better. And so that's something that it's not just like that with people in a hospital or in a physical therapy setting. It's a universal truth that I think we've got to embrace and remember when we're really wanting to help people.
Yeah.
You know, I'm surprised how much my thinking aligns with James. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it would really get excited about change, right? Let's not cling to old ways. Those were good ways. They worked. They were fruitful. It's a new day, a new season. Get excited that we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to show up saying, I don't have the answers right now. I said to someone, as much as I dislike the COVID crisis, what I'm grateful for is what a great thing at this point in my career that I realize I'm not as good as I need to be, that this crisis is beyond what I offer. So I better start growing. I better reinvent myself. That is so much better than plateauing and simply coasting into some settled, sense of how you do your job. Get excited that we don't know the answers, but we serve a God who has them. And I think that's the same thing as challenge develops. And what an opportunity, what a privilege that we have to do things in a new way.
Yeah, I found it interesting because a lot of the folks that we've been bringing on these webinars have been Sat Talk presenters, and obviously I have found things in you folks and others out there that kind of represent these are baked into the DNA of what you do. Challenge is a part of the DNA. Accountability is part of the DNA. I mean, it's just, you're not trying to get there. It's a part of the DNA. And one of the things that's been encouraging to me is that ministries like yours, whether it's stuff that's going on around the world with Business as Mission, those ministries are not dying. I mean, they're doing what they've been doing all along. They're growing, they're adapting, but there's something about the health of an organization when you get this into the very DNA of who you are as an organization. And I think the church missions has yet to get there, if I'm totally honest, is how do we get the average suburban church mission to get that kind of a mindset so that it's adaptable, so that it understands things like your 2 words, James. And they should never want to do that in and of themselves. It doesn't make any sense. But how do you partner with organizations that have that baked into the very things that they're doing? Good stuff. I'm going to keep putting these questions out there for anybody. So Jocelyn and Anthony, if you've got thoughts along these lines, feel free to throw some stuff in as well. Another question, I'd be interested in learning more about some specific volunteer education. We need to do that better, and I am all for stealing good ideas in Jesus' name. I could call him offline if that works. No, time. And actually, this is somebody I know that's involved in rescue mission work here. So what are some good volunteer education? Mike, you've just talked a little bit about Bridges Out of Poverty. James, I mean, tell us a little bit about the kind of stuff that you guys use to help better educate volunteers.
Well, I mean, we have online modules at through the branch of our ministry called True Charity. So university.truecharity.us. And so our volunteers have access to those modules. And then there are some, depending on what program they're volunteering in, they're actually required to take them. But things like how to build real relationships with a person and what are the right boundaries and that type of thing. So also how not to treat people like everybody's coming out of a cookie cutter, but there are individual aspects that we need to recognize and understand in our charity work. So again, we have different effective charity modules there that our volunteers go through, apart from an orientation where we talk through a lot of that type of stuff with volunteers as well.
Got it. Mike, you talked about Bridges Out of Poverty, AHA, and that sort of stuff. Anything else you want to add to that?
You know, they also have a program called Getting Ahead, which is for folks in poverty to learn how to get out of poverty and get ahead in life. Yeah, we've developed some internal things, but I think as a resource that's available to everybody on this call, I would really recommend the Bridges Out of Poverty materials. I think they're superb.
And just to expand on that a little bit, what Bridges has done is they've got 2 different curriculum, if you will. One is for the volunteer to understand, kind of built on the Ruby Payne kinds of stuff of understanding the difference between wealth, middle class, all of those sorts of things. And then there's the Getting Ahead in a Justified World, which is then for leaders within the ministry there to kind of work through a whole process to take charge of their life. There's some good stuff. We'll send some links both to what James was talking about as well as Mike, the Bridges Out of Poverty, in our follow-up email to this. Another question. We've got time for a few more questions.
For me, you know, when I see the staff bring the volunteers and someone want to volunteer at the mission and they walks around and they look at the greatness of what was done at the mission, you know, like I'll be overwhelmed that someone in middle class will come here and they want to volunteer. And, you know, like the beauty of it when they walk around here and see what the investment in people's life and what they have done and what they're willing to come part of someone and help, I think that's one of the greatest things that you get out of it.
You know, I think Anthony makes a good point. We shouldn't overestimate. When people come, it does mean something, right? Especially when they come with the love of Christ, with respect. Folks at the mission are smart. They know who's getting paid and who's not getting paid. And so volunteers have a very big opportunity to be transformative because they're making a statement just by showing up that is pretty unique out there in the world, especially in the streets. So if they could combine that good heart with some training like James was talking about, or with some bridges, they really could be the difference makers in building stronger communities.
Great. So here's something I suppose lots of folks, and I know James, you share a really neat story from way back when of this, but the question is, any advice for how to handle people on the street corner with signs?
Jocelyn, have you ever held a sign, and did you hold a sign?
No, I personally did not, but I see my residents all the time out there, or somebody I don't know, and we have a little business card that says, you know, I got help at the garden. So I communicate, I still communicate a lot about water gardens with them.
Yeah, so Tom, we have cards that we give out to the community so that folks can give a card instead of cash and direct that person to resource that's really going to be helpful. We also do a lot of PSAs on the radio as well as television and a billboard in our city to communicate some important information that would help people think twice before they hand out cash to somebody to cardboard sign. But with a cardboard sign, really, people are they're just trying to make it one way or another. A lot of folks are holding the sign because they do have an addiction issue that they're trying to deal with, and at that point often trying to feed. And we need to think about that before we hand cash out a window to someone. If the sign says "will work for food," I always say take them up on the offer if you're able to. Of course, for some that's hard to do, but maybe you could meet somebody at the McDonald's and say, just meet me over here. I'm going to take 20, 30 minutes of my day and just stop and get to know you a little bit. And then begin to ask some of those questions like, where's your family? Do you have some friends or connections around that could help you? Because that's one of the things that we forget sometimes is we step into a situation, we think, well, we're going to be the savior. We're going to hand them cash, or we're going to be the source of help. But truth be told, there may be somebody already closer to that individual who has a greater responsibility and knows more about what's going on with that person. And a lot of the times, the best thing we can do for somebody who's holding a sign is begin to ask those questions about where are your connections and how could we help you reestablish some healthy connections between you and family.
Yeah, Tom, thank you, James and Jocelyn. Anthony's got a great story of some encounters with some of our downtown panhandlers. Can Anthony share one?
Please.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for allowing me to share. As an ambassador for God and for the mission, being downtown and, like you see panhandlers every day, they ask for money, but we try to not let them ask for money. You go to the mission, we give you sandwich. 365 days a year, we give you sandwiches. If you need a shower, we give you sandwiches. But it was one gentleman, like, I end up like seeing down there three days in a row, seeing him begging. So when he see me, he'll walk away. And just so happened, this one time, I asked him, I said, listen, if you don't ask for nothing, I take you to the city mission. I give you a shower. I give you something to eat. I won't leave until they give you a bed. That was a success story for me. And the man ended up staying there. And I stayed there until he got something to eat, got a shower, got a bed. And today, he graduated, he went through the program and he graduated from the program. And that was the blessing and success story. That was his story. And I'm overwhelmed by it because he went through a lot in his life, and I'm overwhelmed and touched by him today to be able to work for the mission.
That might be one of the answers. So let's partner up. Let's pair up. So if a church is experiencing people with signs or panhandling, call your mission. Hey, do you have some of your folks that would partner up with me that can speak the language, that got a testimony to share? So maybe that's the bigger answer. Like, let's come together on this. Anthony can do things I can't do. I can offer things Anthony can't. Once again, what's the answer? This has to be done together. Bring our gifts and our experiences for something far greater than we are just separate.
Great stuff. I just love the way you folks are. You embody what you said at the very beginning, Jocelyn, what you were talking about. It's relationships. Relationships is what kept you there. Relationships is what got you through in the end. Mike and James, you're continually pushing on that if we think that we can make a difference without getting into the messiness, the redemptive entanglement that it takes to learn the story and you just can't help with a simple transaction of here you go and on your way. how do we begin to instill that in our suburban churches and their work with the poor through organizations like yours? James, you've got some great stuff. Anybody out there that wants to see some really good PSAs and public service announcements for both the radio and TV, you should look at what they've done in Joplin. There's some really, really good stuff out there. I love it.
Well, we've got to communicate the right information to our whole city. And we're all living in community together. Some of us have and some of us have not, but we're all living in a community together. And so it's important to not just educate ourselves at a conference somewhere and bring it back to the mission. We really have to, through what we learn outside the mission walls, what we learn within the mission walls through experience, we have to share that with our whole community to try to help bring them on board. And so it goes back to what Mike was saying about just bringing together the gifts of the body of Christ within a community to really more effectively become all things to all men, that we may by all means save some.
Fantastic. One more question, and then we're going to kind of wrap it up with the final question. Question just came in. Any advice with people that have clear, serious mental health issues on the streets? And that's a very big reality. What advice would you have?
That's the great gap out there, right? The need far exceeds the supply. And we just had to open up our own mental health clinic here just because our folks couldn't get access to mental health. So I think it really is study your community, find out what resources are out there. Don't try to solve it if somebody else is more equipped to do it. So I think it really requires us to know our communities and do the hard research. Where are their mental health clinics? How does somebody access that? Always begin with the existing resource, and then perhaps we can complement that resource, or if we have to, we create our own. So the mental health, that's the great challenge right now.
I think Mike hit it right, because that night we feed the community, and like a lot of them come down, and like they don't have no insurance, no Medicaid, or nothing. And by us opening up a clinic, like we're able to direct them, and they're able to go around, and if they don't have no insurance, the doctor is able to come and see them. Like that means a lot. There's a lot of people hurting, but they don't have no insurance, no Medicaid.
Can I interject?
Sure.
Okay. I totally agree with the finding out where your resources are and stuff, but I've learned from my own experience and in myself as well as with others is that a lot of times addiction.
Hey James, your video has frozen. I'm not sure. I think there's a video. So James, you might have to see if you can reload, and we'll pick that answer up. Modern technology, we love it. Hey, we'll get somebody to see if we can reach them and come back. Yeah, we've lost them. So while they're coming back, Mike, I want to kind of go into the final part of our time together here, and we'll come back when they're there. But I wanted to end these webinars by asking everybody the same question, just on your heart. What do you need most from the American, and I'm speaking primarily to the American suburban church that provides volunteerism, funding, and that kind of stuff for your kind of work? So what do you need the most? And then I want to ask you the same thing, Anthony. What would you like to say to the suburban church? Mike?
I've kind of said it throughout, Tom. It's really not so much what resources they have, but a mindset for them to really embrace that there's a world beyond benevolence. There's a world beyond charity, that there is greatness that lies dormant in our urban neighborhoods, in our under-resourced communities, and to get excited about helping to mine that greatness, to identify it, to really believe that fundamentally God's call is not simply for people to be fed, clothed, or housed, but to become leaders. Isaiah 61, 1-4, the poor, the oppressed, the brokenhearted, the prisoners, they become the oaks of righteousness who rebuild, restore, and renew the ruined cities. God's plan, we can help make that happen. They, the ones who were poor, broken, oppressed, and in prison, they become the community leaders. Just get excited about that and change your paradigm of what is possible. And then finally, how much they can benefit from our people, that it's not a one-sided relationship. Yes, the folks we serve need them, but please hear this, you need our people too. Something in your lives that is missing. There's something in your heart that isn't there that only our people can give you. Let's celebrate God's call to mutuality and reciprocity.
That's superb.
I can't speak no better than that. But he's a man of God. You know, like order for the churches to come to reach, they got to reach their community. They have to come out the churches and come into the community where there's poverty at, and go around the shelters and see the help, the brokenness, and to see where they need to come at and see, because you're only one check away from being just like that person, homeless. You only one check away from being in that line getting a meal. So you have to take that there and look at it like, I need to come alongside of them and help them. How can I help them? How can I help the organizations? Bring God and church to the community.
Thanks. Thanks for jumping back on. Jocelyn, just to let you know where you ended. You said, I've learned from my experience, and then you went,
Oh, wow.
pick us up.
I was saying that with mental illness, you know, sometimes it's like drug induced. There's an addiction problem, which is the underlying deal. And so it's like, I mean, you can take care of the problem. A lot of times that will correct itself, you know, but the struggle is real with mental illness, you know, and it's like a lot of times people need help and medication and those resources. But a lot of times people are just going because they want to get that shot of Suboxone, you know, to help with the opiate deal. Or, you know, we've got some doctors, mental health doctors, dishing it out for methamphetamine addicts. Doesn't do a darn thing for methamphetamine, you know. So it's important to figure, you know, have that communication and have that relationship so you can understand what the underlying root is.
Thank you.
Good advice, yeah. So let me end. When you guys slipped out, James, I went and asked the final question to Mike and Anthony, and I want to ask you both the same thing. James, what do you need most from the American church? Jocelyn, what would you like to say most to the American church? James, start us off.
Well, it's interesting, as I came back on and I was listening to Mike, I thought, I don't know what he's answering to, but I sure like his answer. And and as he was talking, I actually began to think about that Isaiah 58 passage from which we named our ministry. And you know, this is the fast that God chooses for his people. It's not just to go to church on a Sunday and a Wednesday night and to tithe, but you know, in Isaiah 58 verse 6, God begins to spell out what it is that he's expecting of his people: to divide their bread with the hungry, to clothe the naked, to bring the homeless poor in. But in Isaiah 58:10, I think that's the key verse that came to mind as I was listening to Mike. God, through his prophet, says, if you will give yourself, or if you will, some versions say, extend your soul to people who are hungry and in need, then you will be like a watered garden and like a spring whose waters never fail. So God has on his mind an invigorated, healthy, church that's full of Zoe life. And that comes when we finally realize that we're being called to a cross and the resurrection life beyond that, where we are no longer hanging on to this life, but we let it go for what Christ died for, that we might have the life the abundant life that he promises. And part of that then causes us to be willing to give ourselves to those who are in need. Now that's the scriptural answer that came to mind as I was listening to Mike. In my notes, I had written something much more simple, which was the church has got to do the tough thing of asking the real question, is what we are doing affecting change? The church has got to ask that question. Whatever the benevolence program is it really affecting change in people's lives? Is it bringing about the sustained transformation that Christ would want in a person's life? So it's a tough question, but I think that's something that we ought to be asking.
Oh, I agree. Jocelyn, a last thought.
I kind of think the same thing. I think what's important is that I mean, I know giving of yourself is really good, but I think just to understand that giving isn't the answer either. It's really important to, like, for example, like, at our organization, we people earn stuff that they want to work, want. Just like if you went, if you wanted to go into a store and you wanted to buy something, you worked your job and you paid it forward, you paid your dues for it. And I see a lot of individuals develop, feel prideful with that. They feel good about themselves that, hey, I earned this. It's not like, they're not a lot of grumbling, if you think that, but they're really, good. I know James had a really good story about a guy, that was mopping the church one day, or wasn't doing anything. He wanted this, wanted that. And James asked him to mop the church. And when he was done, he was like really grateful, that he was able to do that.
Yeah, amen. Well said.
Yeah, I mean, I love that with both of you, you've got things built into to what you do that demonstrates the value of work in that whole thing. So, man, thank you, Anthony, Jocelyn. Thank you so very much for joining us. James, and there you go, James and Michael, thank you for all the work that you're doing in your ministries. We love it. For our participants, we sure appreciate you taking the time with us. We'll be sending you some stuff out that you'll have a little better idea about the Bridges Out of Poverty, about the True Charity Summit that's coming up. Our whole ministry is built around working with churches over a period of time to get to the point where this kind of stuff is natural to your congregation. We do it through a thing called Missions 3.0, and next week at this same time, we'll be doing an introduction to Missions 3.0. It's a 1-hour overview. It'll help you better understand some ways that we could help your church over time to become the kind of partners that would naturally fit with the kind of work that James is doing and that Mike is doing in their work. We've got plenty of resources out there. You can see all of the videos from our Sat Talk presenters of the past on our YouTube channel. We've got our Significant Matters website, our Sat Talk website. We even have an impact investment fund in which we're trying to incentivize churches to actually get involved in creating loans for people as part of what it means to do development through church mission. So thank you for taking the time. Panelists, I know I speak for all of the people that attended this. Thank you for taking time and for sharing with us your stories. Thank
Tom,
you.
thanks for what you're doing, Tom. You are a great resource for the suburban church. You've impacted us in Schenectady. Thank you for your God-anointed work.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Mike, it was great to see you again.
You too, James.
Thank you.
God bless you, brother.
Thank you.
You guys have a great day today.
Thank
Blessings,
you. God bless you.
everybody.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Jocelyn.
Bye.
Bye-bye.